Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, novel editor. I hope you're all doing really well. Today we are going to talk about the Flat character arc. This video was very highly requested, so I'm really excited to get into it with you guys. I am going to make two different videos about the Flat arc. This video, we're going to be talking about the components of the arc, but primarily how the characters interact, so how the Flat arc character interacts with the side characters, how the side characters interact with the Flat arc character, as well as just sort of how we see those character arc components play out in the Flat arc. But in the next video, I am going to walk through structure and some structural patterns we tend to see with Flat arc protagonists. So stay tuned for that in the next video. I will be using films as the examples as I have for all the structural videos and all the character arc videos. And again, that's not because I don't love novels. I primarily work with novelists. It's just that it's a lot more difficult for us to remember the plot of novels and for all of us to be on the same page. So films just make it a lot easier, and they give some sort of visual cues and visual memory, which can help a lot with comprehension. So that's why I'm using films. I will be spoiling pretty heavily in this video Legally Blonde, Pretty Woman, The Dark Knight, and Paddington 2. So if you wanted to see any of those movies and you don't want them spoiled, I recommend that you watch them first before watching this video. So let's go ahead and go over the components of the character arc. These are the same components that we would see in any story with an arc of any type. We have the motivation, the character's deepest desire, commonly for love, power, safety, belonging, etc. Like we talked about in our other videos, this is often pretty deep under the surface, and we might have to really dig into a film or into a novel to really analyze the motivation. The goal. The tangible external objective. This is the thing the character wants, the thing their motivation drives them to strive for. It can and often does change over the course of a story. The belief. Something the character believes about themselves, other people, or the world. This belief can be true or false. It could be positive or negative, depending on the type of arc. The lesson, an alternative perspective that contradicts the belief. The character may or may not accept this lesson in the end. If the lesson is taken on, it would become a new belief, and the lesson may be positive or negative depending on the type of arc. If you're confused about any of these elements or you don't really understand what I'm talking about with the components of the arc, I will put a link in the description for my video on the components of the arc, and I recommend that you watch that first. It will give you a much better understanding of what I'm talking about in this video. So whether you watched my previous videos or not, I'm sure that you are well aware of the classic positive character arc. This is a character who starts with a negative belief at the beginning of a story and learns a positive lesson. You've probably also heard about negative arcs where the character starts with a positive belief and learns a negative lesson or becomes worse over the course of the story. What's so different and so interesting about the Flat arc is that we won't see this transition happen. So we won't see a character going from a positive or a negative belief to a positive or a negative lesson. So we will see a character who has a belief, either positive or negative, but it's much more commonly positive. We more typically see positive Flat arc characters, but there are negative ones. And the belief that character holds at the beginning, it won't change. They won't learn a lesson. They won't change their belief. They will end in the same place that they started. They may have accomplishments. They may have new friends. They may have had a makeover. All kinds of different things might have happened over the course of the story. But that core belief about themselves, about other people, that will not have changed over the course of this story. So you might be wondering then, what makes a Flat arc an arc at all? How is it an arc if the character doesn't learn anything? And in a lot of ways, this might be somewhat of a strange terminology issue. So if it's confusing to you to consider it an arc, you don't really have to consider it an arc, but I will explain why we generally consider it to be an arc, and that is because it still has all of the components of the arc. So there is still a lesson in the Flat arc. So even though the character won't take on the lesson, they won't learn the lesson, a lesson is still presented to them. And in the Flat arc, with the Flat arc character, that lesson is actually coming from the group. So it might be coming from a society, it might be coming from a whole school, so like a student body, it might be coming from a whole family, it's coming from a group. So if you think about this sort of logically, if we have a character who holds to their belief and they're not going to waver on that belief, they might have some doubt, and doubt does play a role in the flat arc, but for the most part, they're holding on to that belief throughout. In order to create a plot line, we need there to be a significant amount of opposition. So we can't have the flat arc character, typically, it's possible, but typically we can't have that character just butt up against one other character who has a different belief or who doesn't agree with their belief. If that were the case, they would say just move on to someone else. So if it was a widely held belief in whatever group or society the character was in, that flat arc character would just move on to someone else. They just get a different love interest, they would make friends with someone else, etc. There wouldn't be as much of a problem. So the big problem that happens with the flat arc character is that their belief goes against the larger group. What they feel, what they believe to be true in themselves is not what's widely held to be true. So there will be a very strong vibe of you should act like us, you should be more like we are, we won't accept you the way that you are, we don't like you the way that you are. And that's a very, very strong aspect of the flat arc storyline. In Legally Blonde, the pretty blonde girl has no place among the smart students at Harvard. In Paddington 2, the friendly, good-mannered bear has no place among the gruff prisoners. We even see this same idea playing out in negative flat arc characters. In The Dark Knight, society, even the bad guys, even the criminals, don't like that the Joker doesn't conform to normal behaviors and objectives like making money, and instead values chaos. There may also be a mindset in stories with flat arc protagonists that the protagonist is acting above their station or above their rank. In Pretty Woman, a low-class woman has no place in a classy hotel or with a rich businessman. In all of these cases, the message from the group, from society, is clear: conform or get out. But if you've seen any of these movies or you've seen any other movies with flat arc characters, you probably already know that eventually we start to see the group sort of caving to the influence of the flat arc character. We start to see that flat arc character changing the world around them and making a difference. Though Gotham already had a crime problem at the beginning of the film, Batman and Harvey Dent were seen as beacons of hope, and the Joker descends Gotham into complete criminal chaos, turns the city against Batman, and turns Harvey Dent into Two-Face. Elle Wood's positivity, loyalty, and belief in herself results in her finding friends as well as allies among her fellow students, bettering their lives, and she ends up being the elected speaker at her graduation. Paddington transforms the prison into a far more comfortable, beautiful, and happy place, and inspires Knuckles the prison chef to let go of his motto, "I don't do nothing for no one for nothing," and help save the day in the end. Vivian in Pretty Woman wins over the hotel staff and teaches Edward to value people over money. In the majority of cases, we will see that the flat arc character has inspired change in the whole group, usually aside from a few bad eggs. So there's usually one or two characters who still don't like them and still don't change. But on the whole, we tend to see that the group has been changed, usually for the positive, but it could be for the negative. To further demonstrate this, let's go ahead and look at an example. Legally Blonde. This is the story of Elle Woods, our flat arc protagonist. She is a friendly, popular, and quite accomplished sorority girl into fashion and beauty who at the beginning of the film believes her boyfriend Warner is about to propose to her. But he ends up breaking up with her because he thinks she isn't serious enough now that he's heading off to Harvard. And she decides to go to Harvard herself to try to win him back. Elle Woods has a very strong belief in herself. We could define this roughly as something like, I can do anything. We can see that belief in her behavior consistently from the very beginning of the film. We see it when she is confident Warner is going to propose, and when she confidently proclaims that she's going to Harvard without even thinking for a second that she might not be able to. Even after arriving and struggling to acclimate at Harvard, being embarrassed in front of everyone, she still believes she can get the internship, and at the very end, she is still confident in her ability to win the case for their client. Her capability is not at all in question in her mind. Most of the people around her have a belief about Elle that we could define as something like, you can't be taken seriously. More casually, we might say that the general belief is that she's just a dumb blonde, but we're going to be a little nicer and go with what is most overtly stated in the film. We see this view being conveyed by the majority of characters. Her boyfriend Werner breaks up with her because he says he needs a serious wife since he's going to Harvard. Her advisor at school thinks she needs a backup school because she'll never get into Harvard. Even her parents tell her that law school is for ugly people. When she gets to the school, the professors treat her as dumb or as not serious. So we have Elle's belief that she can do anything, and the lesson in Elle's flat arc is the belief that most of the other characters hold about her, that she can't be taken seriously. So if you're confused about this at all, or you ever have a hard time understanding this, you really can boil it down to looking for that lesson, because the lesson will always be incompatible with the belief. So we will always have a belief that is the opposite polarity of the lesson, and we will always have a lesson that is incompatible with the belief. So you can look for that in order to better understand what's going on with this story, whether this story is a positive arc or a negative arc, or a positive flat or a negative flat. You can look at what belief is actually being held and also what lesson is actually being pushed. And there may be many other things going on with the characters, many other things going on with the story, but we want to look at that core of the character arc in order to understand it. In the case of Elle Woods, her belief that she can do anything is incompatible with the lesson that she can't be taken seriously. Because Elle starts with a positive belief, I can do anything, even though her arc is flat, the lesson is going to be the opposite polarity. In this case, negative, you can't be taken seriously. So you might be saying to yourself, is Elle Woods really a character with a positive belief? After all, she does follow a boy to Harvard and she puts all this effort into following him, which we might say, is that really such a good thing to do? The important thing to keep in mind with the flat arc character, and really with all characters, is that the belief that we're concerned with is what the core of the story is about. So the character can have many different traits, many different thoughts and beliefs and feelings, and all of those things can exist to create a dynamic character, an interesting character, a character who feels like a real person. We don't have to have a perfect character for that character to have a positive belief. So even though we might say that it's not the best thing that Elle chases a boy to Harvard, we're not concerned about that when we're talking about the arc. That's not what the arc is about. Now, this is where the flat arc characters get really interesting. So in your typical story is going to be a positive character arc story, and we'll also see some less commonly, but we will see some negative arc stories as well. In the flat arc story, the growth does not come from the protagonist. However, we do still see growth in the story. That growth will come from the side characters. And what's really interesting is that the lesson comes from society, from the larger group, but that's the protagonist's lesson. The side character's lesson will actually come from the flat arc protagonist. It may come from their beliefs, so their main thing, their core character arc component, the thing that the societal lesson is against, or it may be more so just a character trait. So it may be that the flat arc character presents a trait that other characters come to see in a positive light over the course of the film or over the course of the novel. But that's really the core of what makes a flat arc plotline, is we see this sort of push and pull dynamic where the flat arc protagonist is presenting the lesson to society, to the side characters, to everyone else. Meanwhile, they're all presenting a lesson to the flat arc character. In Legally Blonde, Elle Woods goes to Harvard only to find that her ex-boyfriend Werner is engaged to Vivian. Vivian outright does not like Elle at the beginning, seeing her as a romantic rival and sharing the widely held belief that she is a dumb blonde or that Elle can't be taken seriously. She intentionally excludes Elle from study group and purposefully embarrasses her with the classic fake costume party trick. But as the story progresses and Vivian is treated as subpar by her professor, who asks her, the female, to go get coffee and never the males, and she starts to see Werner using people and not being a loyal person, she becomes impressed by Elle's ethics at work and comes to take on Elle's belief as her lesson. Elle can do anything. She isn't just a dumb blonde. And there's also a big helping of men undervaluing both of them because they're both women. We will almost always, nearly 100% of the time, see at least one character in a story with a flat arc protagonist who experiences a change arc. So they will either have a positive arc or a negative arc. Very, very rarely will we ever see people predominantly having flat arcs around the flat arc protagonist. There will be characters who have a flat arc, but predominantly the general vibe of the flat arc protagonist story is going to surround the changing of other characters and other characters usually becoming better. Usually we're talking about a flat positive character making the characters surrounding them have positive character arcs. Another example is Elle's friend Paulette, who works at the beauty salon. We see that she has no confidence in herself and is completely unable to approach the man she has a crush on. Through Elle's influence and encouragement, she learns to have self-confidence in the same way that Elle has self-confidence, allowing her to get the man she wants. Due to Elle's influence, both of these two characters have positive character arcs. There will also almost always be another flat arc character who is the opposite polarity of the flat arc protagonist. So like I mentioned, in the majority of cases, we're going to have a positive flat arc protagonist. In most cases, we're going to see a negative flat arc antagonist, or at least a very prominent negative flat arc character, a character who does not take on the lesson and does not learn to change in some way, who doesn't better themselves in any way. For example, Elle's ex-love interest Warner doesn't think Elle can be taken seriously, just like almost everyone else. But on a more personal level, he holds a belief that it's okay to use people to get ahead. We see this belief when he dumps Elle for not being serious enough, when he previously said that they would be together forever, and when he gets back with Vivian because she's a more serious, upstanding girlfriend for his career aspirations. And we see this again when Elle refuses to give up the secret alibi of the client they're representing. And Warner says it doesn't matter that Elle gave her word to the client and she should just reveal the secret alibi anyway. And then at the very end, we see Warner hasn't grown at all when he is disloyal to Vivian and tries to get back with Elle now that Elle is successful, again trying to use people to get ahead. Warner demonstrates from beginning to end that he is sticking to his belief that using people is okay, rejecting Elle's influence and the positive demonstrations she's given of the importance of loyalty. Note that Warner's arc here isn't exactly the opposite of Elle's belief. So we don't have to adhere really, really tightly to exactly this one belief, one lesson. The important thing is Elle still demonstrated the lesson to Warner, even though it wasn't her core belief. So he doesn't learn specifically to believe in Elle or to believe in himself. He does see loyalty demonstrated by Elle. So throughout the film, he has opportunities to accept this lesson from Elle. He sees it demonstrated in her, even though he does not take that on. So that's completely fine. You have a lot of flexibility here in how the flat arc protagonist can impact the side characters. It does not have to be this super tight specifically that they learn the belief of the flat arc character and take that on as their lesson. There can be a different lesson proposed to them. And again, you really have to take a look at what do we see this character saying and believing throughout, what is either negative or positive, what is the thing that they seem to believe that has something that opposes it. So in this case, we see consistently that Warner is presented with opportunities to be loyal and chooses not to be, and so that's how we come to understand that that's what his lesson is. Seeing the flat arc character and the flat arc character's belief in action is really destabilizing to the whole group. But we also tend to see one or two side characters who really, really, really distrust or don't like this flat arc character. Typically that's because these flat arc characters can be very childlike, almost very pure in their intentions. Their motivations are very clean, and this tends to be in opposition to what's generally held to be true within the group. So you'll often find at least one or two characters who particularly distrust the flat arc character. They think they can't really be as nice as they're acting like they are. They can't really be as good as they seem to be, or they must have some sort of devious intentions. And so we tend to see a lot of fear and distrust from at least one or two side characters. In Paddington 2, Paddington is a happy-go-lucky bear with great manners trying to make money to buy his aunt a gift, but his neighbor, Mr. Curry, is extremely distrustful of him and thinks Paddington's window washing business is just a way for him to rob people. In Pretty Woman, Edward, the love interest's business partner Stucky, thinks Vivian's friendliness and enthusiasm must mean that she is a corporate spy. We can even see this in scarier flat arc villains being seen through the lens of normal and expected values and beliefs. For example, Bruce Wayne tries to understand the motives and goals of the Joker's crimes in The Dark Knight and has to come to understand that he isn't looking for the typical things like money or power, he just wants to watch the world burn, he wants chaos. Now that we've talked about characters who oppose the flat arc character, let's talk about the flip side, characters who actually really like the flat arc character. Though the group as a whole will generally oppose the flat arc character, we will tend to see at least one or two characters who do actually really like the flat arc character. Typically, they will find their difference from society, their unusual attitudes and behaviors really appealing or really alluring, and they will actually be pretty attracted to the character from the beginning. In Pretty Woman, Vivian is supported and encouraged by her friend Kit, as well as by Mr. Morse, who owns the company Edward, her love interest, is trying to buy and break apart. He finds Vivian's lack of knowledge about how to use the cutlery at dinner appealing and endearing, and he makes her feel more comfortable with her mistakes. In Legally Blonde, Elle has the support of her sorority who always believes in her, and Emmett, the love interest, who supports and believes in Elle from the moment he meets her. These characters take her seriously when others do not. In Paddington 2, many people in Windsor Gardens are friends with Paddington and see his goodness and kindness from the very beginning. These supportive side characters sort of act as the lens through which we can perceive the character in a more positive light. They tend to more represent how we as the viewer or as the reader would feel about the characters, and they let us really see their positive traits shine. I also want to point out that just because a side character likes or is attracted to the flat arc character, that doesn't mean that that character doesn't have room to grow or doesn't need to have an arc. In Pretty Woman, Edward doesn't understand Vivian at the beginning, but he doesn't dislike her either. He is both attracted to her, and I don't just mean physically, we see him watching her joy and her laughter with intrigue and happiness. She is something so vastly different from what he generally experiences. But this doesn't mean he acts as her ally. He makes it clear that this is only a business deal and that no romance or long-term commitment can come of their arrangement. I wanted to talk about this specifically because I don't want you to feel stifled or pigeonholed in your own stories. We don't have to have characters who need to have an arc fundamentally dislike the flat arc character. We have so many possibilities for how this can play out, and it's completely possible and not even atypical for a flat arc character to have another character who does find them very alluring or very appealing, but also needs to grow. We will almost always see in this case that that character will have an arc, so we almost never would see a situation where a character would find the flat arc character alluring or enticing and then not learn their lesson, so to have a flat negative arc. We almost never see this. It's not impossible, but in general, what we're going to see is that character who finds them very alluring and needs to learn a lesson will ultimately learn their lesson. We see Vivian helps cause a positive arc in Edward. In the beginning, he values business and money over people. We see this demonstrated in the beginning when his girlfriend breaks up with him because he spends too much time at work, as well as in his business pursuits of buying and breaking up struggling companies to sell off the parts. Vivian's totally foreign perspective on business and people leads him on his positive path towards valuing people more than business or money, which we see demonstrated at the end, both in how he chooses to stay with Vivian and in how he chooses to not break up the struggling business he spent the whole film attempting to buy. There are so many possibilities for how the flat arc character can induce or not induce change in the side characters, and as a result of that, we tend to see a variety of different types of character arcs all playing out in the same story. If we look back at Legally Blonde, we can see this wide variety of arcs playing out. Emmett is a positive flat character who has the belief Elle can do it from beginning to end. Vivian is a positive arc character who has the belief that Elle can't do it at the beginning and that Elle can do it at the end. Werner is a flat negative character who believes that it's okay to use people from beginning to the end. Paulette is a positive arc character who believes that she can't do it at the beginning and that she can do it at the end. Professor Callahan is a flat negative character who believes that Elle's only value is her looks from beginning to end. All of these different arcs are really what make these flat arc stories so dynamic and interesting and full of fun and memorable characters. I also want to point out that a flat arc character does not have to be the protagonist or the antagonist. A flat arc character can be a more minor character. They often can serve a really important role in encouraging and inspiring the protagonist. So we have a lot of options in our work to include flat arc characters without them necessarily being one of the primary characters. In American Beauty, Lester is a burnt out, bored, and mostly uncared about member of his family. He does a job he hates and lives a lifeless, soul-crushing existence. However, Ricky, a boy who moves in next door, a flat arc character, quits his job in front of Lester, and this inspires Lester to go after what he wants and be who he wants to be. Ricky also encourages Lester's daughter Jane, his love interest, to have a positive arc and to become more secure in who she is. He plays a major role and a vital role in the story as a flat character, but he definitely isn't the protagonist. So now that we've gone over the importance of the side characters and the antagonists, let's wrap up by going back to the flat arc character themselves. So you might be thinking that it seems that these characters do kind of need to learn a lesson, or that they actually do in fact learn a lesson over the course of the film or the book, or at the very least that they did change, so that they're not exactly the same character they were at the beginning. So there's a few different things at play here. One is, like I mentioned, the flat arc character does not have to be perfect. We are not trying to make a character who never does anything wrong, never makes any mistakes, and doesn't have any flaws. That is not going to be a character who feels realistic and is not really going to result in good writing or interesting writing. The second thing is, and we're going to go over this in way more depth when we talk about how story structure impacts the flat character arc and vice versa, sort of how that plays out. But the traditional story structure still applies to the vast majority of flat arc stories. So as a result of that, we still need to see those low points happening. And so how we see that manifesting are moments of doubt. So where we would normally maybe see the need to learn a lesson and then eventually learning the lesson, in the flat arc stories, we're more so going to see moments of doubt where the character sort of wavers or almost loses their belief. For example, Elle Woods gets frustrated by not being taken seriously and leaves Harvard. Paddington thinks his family has forgotten him in prison. Vivian's feelings are hurt when Edward doesn't consider her a proper love interest. But a flat arc character will always ultimately reaffirm their belief in the end. We will talk a lot more about this in the next video when we go over structure. The other reason you might feel that these characters have changed is that they may very well have changed in some way. The important thing to keep in mind with character arcs is it's not that the character has to only change in one direction or can only change in a specific way. The character arc is only concerned with the belief that the story is actually about. So often with flat arc characters, we will see makeovers. Makeovers are really common with flat arc characters. They may look very different at the end. They may have gained friends and allies. They may have learned things. They may have achieved things. They may have gained more wisdom, and they may have even maybe become a little bit more jaded than they were at the beginning. But that core belief, that the fundamental aspect of their character arc, that has not changed. That has stayed the same. So we don't have to have the character have no change whatsoever or be identical to how they were at the beginning, but that core belief will not have changed. For example, Vivian in Pretty Woman can learn to appreciate the finer things in life and start to dress more upper class, and Elle Woods can become a lawyer and ditch her boyfriend even once he wants her back, but they do not have a belief about themselves or the world that has changed. So let's sum up the basics of the flat arc. The belief won't change from beginning to end, but it might deepen or even potentially weaken. The lesson is usually a belief held by society as a whole. The flat arc character will not take on or adopt the lesson. At least one side character has to have a change arc, positive or negative, as a result of interacting with the flat arc protagonist. Almost always, at least one side character, usually an antagonist, will also have a flat arc of the opposite polarity. So that is all for this video. I really hope that you found it helpful. I'm really excited for the next video when we're going to get into how story structure interacts with this flat arc and all the different options and ways that that can be presented. So definitely stay tuned for that if you are interested. If you want to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon. I do a podcast every other week on there at the $5 and up tier. So please join us on there. And at the $2 and up tier, you can hang out with us on Discord and we have a lot of fun. If you can't afford to support, I completely understand, and feel free to help in whatever way you can, leaving a comment, sharing the video to your writers group, just liking the video, etc. It makes a huge difference and really helps me to reach more people, more writers. So that is all for this video. I will be back with the video on how story structure and the flat arc interact with each other. And in the meantime, happy writing, guys.